The 20th century has well been called this evil. Never before have the forces of evil been so effectively and systematically organized. Seldom before has there been such evidence of diabolical influence in human affairs. The Nazi devil rose first and sent his panzer columns through the hedgerows of France, across the plains of Russia, and into the deserts of North Africa. But he overextended himself, and his power was smashed. But now we find, to our horror, that another devil of even greater malice has taken his place. Hitler died in the bunker in Berlin, but his place has been seized by Khrushchev, Kedar, Mayo, and Cho. The Gestapo has given way to the Soviet secret police. Mein Kampf to the Manifesto. The swastika to the hammer and sickle. With greater calculation and subtlety, the communists continue the work of the Nazis. The two movements have the same source and basically the same ideology. Dethrone God, destroy religion, degrade the individual, abolish freedom. The people are not important. Only the party exists. Lie, brainwash, murder if necessary, but succeed. Impose communism on the people.
Insight. The religious principles underlying American democracy. The fundamental connection between faith and freedom.
How do you do? My name is Father Kieser. The pictures you saw at the start of this program are not pleasant ones, but they were taken in our lifetime, and they do accurately chronicle the times in which we live. We have seen evil operate on an unprecedented scale. The forces of atheism are mobilized as never before, and there's no telling where they will stop. Our way of life, with its freedom and its rights, is under attack. The outcome remains very much in doubt. This is a battle, and in this battle, each of us has a part to play. But what can the individual do? What can you do to check the spread of evil? When you look at the external threat of communism, there's a natural tendency to be dazzled by the immensity of the problem. You look at the newspaper, and what do you see? Nuclear testing, disarmament, better red than dead, better dead than red, surrender or survival, nuclear testing, megatons of negotiations. It's all very confusing. You may be tempted to say, it's too much for me. Let the president handle Khrushchev. Let the Strategic Air Command defend the country. And let the FBI manage our internal security. In other words, let somebody else do it. I'm still comfortable. The Russians seem a long way away. What can I do? I'm just one individual. Well, the truth is there's much you can do. Evil is basically a personal thing, and therefore it can be fought only by persons, by individuals like you and me. The President and the Strategic Air Command and the FBI have their jobs to do, but so do you. This country is only as strong as the individuals who compose it. No one can abdicate his responsibility, nor delegate it to another. Communism, you know, is more than a conspiracy, an economic system, or a military force. Communism is a religion, the religion of atheism. It is a philosophy of hatred, an ideology of error. Communism is the kingdom of Satan. It is a spiritual force, and this is why the bulk of our energies must be harnessed to fight this battle on the field of the spirit, in the minds and hearts and souls of men. We Americans must know what we believe and why we believe it. We must have a clearly articulated philosophy of freedom. If this battle is to be won, we must be ready to sacrifice our comforts. We must be willing to suffer for our Christian democratic ideals. We must be prepared to die rather than compromise with evil. Yes, there's much you can do. There's much you alone can do. I mean, you can make your own private war on evil. It's not enough to resist evil. You must attack evil and seek to destroy it. I do not mean that you are to attack evil people. That would do more harm than good. Force solves few problems. And besides, I don't believe there are any evil people. There are just good people who do evil things and who live according to evil principles. But I do mean that you are to fight evil actions with good actions, oppose hatred with love, counter deceit with truth. And here, you must begin with yourself. You did not misunderstand me. Each of us must begin with himself. Khrushchev has no monopoly on evil. In every human heart, there are evil tendencies. It may be greed with you, or selfishness, or sensuality. But the evil impulses are there. Each of us has a problem akin to that of Matt Talbot.
Matt Talbot grew up in Dublin, Ireland. He wasn't much for school, and so at the age of 12 he quit and went to work for a wine merchant. Here, Matt Talbot learned to drink. Within a year, he was an habitual drunkard. Every night, he came home drunk. Slowly, Matt deteriorated. He was a Catholic, but he neglected the sacraments of his church. Matt seldom missed work, but one week when he was 25, he skipped work and drank right through the week. By Friday, his money was gone, and his credit was exhausted. And yet his craving for drink grew by the hour. He could think of only one way to satisfy his thirst. He would sponge on his friends. He had treated them. Why shouldn't they treat him? But Matt Talbot was due to be disappointed. Not one of his friends offered to buy him a drink. He was deeply stung. Anger filled his heart as he headed for home. After dinner, he said to his mother, "I'm going to take the pledge." Matt Talbot found the local priest, made his first confession in 3 years, and took the pledge, promising God he would not drink for 3 months. For more than 12 years, he had hardly gone a day without a drink. He had a tough road ahead of him, and he knew it. Fortunately, his attitude was a realistic attitude. He knew he could not handle his drink. His life was completely unmanageable because of it. But Matt did have one great advantage. He still had his faith. He knew there was a power greater than himself, a power who was a person who loved every one of his creatures. It was to this person, to God, that Matt Talbot now turned. The first 3 months were terribly difficult. The craving became more intense. But he hung on. And the more he hung on, the more he realized that what he couldn't do alone, he could do with God's help. Prayer became the most important part of Matt Talbot's life. Every morning he attended Mass and received Christ in Holy Communion. Until his death 45 years later, Matt Talbot retained his sobriety. He never had another drink. His life of prayer increased. All of his spare time, 6 to 8 hours a day, was spent in prayer, communing with God. And this is why Matt Talbot, the drunk, may someday be declared a saint by the Catholic Church.
Matt Talbot did not have to look outside himself to uncover the forces of evil. He found the devil in his own heart, in the weaknesses of his own nature. And it was there that Matt Talbot fought and defeated him. In many ways, Matt Talbot was a small man, living out his small life in a small way. But the bigness of Matt Talbot is this: he conquered evil on his own level. Your problem may not be as serious as that of Matt Talbot, but the basic battle is the same. Each individual must learn to control his physical appetites, to discipline his body and subject its impulses to the rule of reason. This is no easy task. The emotions and passions are wild by nature. They do not take kindly to discipline and control. And yet control is possible. The senses can be governed, but only when the individual seeks and accepts strength from outside himself. I mean from God. Without God's help, we are incapable of mastering ourselves. But with that help, there is no desire that cannot be checked, no indulgence that cannot be curbed, no energy that cannot be harnessed. And not only is self-control possible, but self-control is absolutely necessary. You are not fully a human being until you have accomplished it. The dissipated man is hardly a man at all. He is left without strength of character, without power of will, with no capacity to war on evil. He cannot give himself because he does not possess himself. Such a person will be able to change the world only after he has first changed himself. A nation is only as strong as the moral fiber of its citizens. A nation of dissipated men is a weak and spineless nation. It can easily be tyrannized and enslaved. I think we have more to fear in America from the breakdown of Christian morality than we do from Russian missiles. But a nation of disciplined men will be a strong and powerful nation. They will retain their freedom because they know how to use it. They will have the spiritual stamina necessary to repel the forces of evil. Gertrude Lefort, the great German novelist, found herself surrounded by evil. She watched Hitler rise to power in her beloved Germany and stampede her countrymen into a devastating war. The Nazis approached her. Would she use her literary talents for propaganda purposes? She categorically refused. She chose abject poverty rather than collaborate with the new paganism. She did everything she could to check Hitler's power. Surrounded by the powers of evil and living under almost constant Allied aerial bombardment, Gertrude Lefort describes for us her experiences.
What I have to offer you is not a flight to the heights, but a gaze into the abyss of the world and its last terrors. But let me tell you this in advance for your consolation. Despite all the horrors it implies, I would not care to miss that journey through the night in my life. And I am in a very serious and sorrowful way grateful for having experienced and suffered it in Germany with countless others. For not only the bright day, but also the night has its wonders. And there are experiences of divine love that are granted us only in extreme abandonment, nay, on the brink of despair. The first surprising change we noticed was in the extraordinary fragility of all that we call culture, civilization, human morality. We could not imagine that outbreaks of unchecked malice and cruelty and anti-Christian persecutions on a great scale were possible. We were naive enough to think that this was reserved for past ages. For the idea of the real power of evil had been lost to our generation. We talked about injustice and crime, but we did not realize that behind these clear earthly ideas stood an abysmal metaphysical mystery, called by the Church the mystery of iniquity, which is clearly known only to a few, even among the Christians of today, and which is ignored completely by the non-believing world, which seems equally unaware of the power of the devil and the power of God. People think that man, with a fair amount of goodwill, intelligence, and strength of character, can master evil. This is not true. Only the supernatural is equal to the preternatural. In the recognition of this truth lies the key to the understanding of those days. Also, individual experiences give testimony to this. For it was by no means always the strongest, the most prudent and sane who avoided seduction, or those whom we had known as pious. Every form of piety that was merely external collapsed. Oh, I saw many fail, and many stand up wonderfully in a most unexpected manner. And in both cases, the decisive factor was the living union with the supernatural, with the Savior of the world, whose strength is mighty in the weak. You know that in those days, it was the intention of Germany to eliminate Christianity. Thus, we found ourselves placed back in the centuries which preceded the coming of Christ. And so we prepared ourselves in a soul depth never known before to experience the wonder of Christmas. I shall never forget that when during the Christmas Mass, in a darkened and packed church, suddenly the sirens gave the pre-alarm. Not one worshiper rose to flee, although at any moment the full alarm might be given. all were determined not to let even extreme danger rob them of the celebration of the Holy Night. The longing for Christ continued so strong that it even seized people who up to then had ignored him. More than once I was to hear from non-Christians most moving confessions, and we saw people take part in the Corpus Christi procession who in no way belonged to the church. Our churches were always full, and during the bombing raids, the Catholics in the bomb shelters were always asked to pray aloud. One may feel inclined to shrug off such things with the skeptic's remarks. These are manifestations of fear. But I think rather that danger tears open the portals to the deeper and more essential elements of the soul. Another change that occurred in those days was our relationship to Protestants. In the common threat to our religious possessions, our separated brethren did not find their way to common creed, but to common love. I do not believe this attitude will change, because we have suffered too much together. There are, unfortunately, in present-day Germany, many political and other conflicts, but there is no denominational conflict. We learned to rely exclusively on God, much more than before. This was the extraordinary, yes, the inestimable gain in those days when all earthly supports were taken from us. Of course, we thought we had trusted in God before, but what does trust in God mean as long as one can rely on a well-ordered state, on the protection of the police, money, possessions, and an honorable position in life? I assure you, it is an entirely different thing to trust in God when he is the only one we can rely on, when absolutely all human security is gone, when at any moment the roof over your head figuratively and literally can collapse. When should you take sick, there's no hospital to receive you. When any day you may be driven out of your home and put on the street, or you may travel for days and weeks in a cattle car lying on straw. Or you may be jailed and put to death with not a possibility to defend yourself. And to any moment you may hear that your relatives and friends lie buried under the rubble of your native town, or have perished in the gas chamber of a concentration camp. And this may be your fate, too. I do not know whether you can imagine what such a situation implies. I know I could not before I experienced it. For it means nothing less and nothing more than the question, what remains when everything falls? Only the church stood ready, alert and firm in her inner center with the mystery of the Mass and the sacraments. But how long, we anxiously ask ourselves. Here we face the same question. What will remain if someday the churches are closed, the reception of the sacraments made impossible, the liturgy and the preaching of the gospel cease, and all church edifices demolished? The answer all down the line was, God remains. Christ, the Lord of the church, remains with us, even when all visible signs of his grace and his kingdom vanish. I cannot tell you what comfort this certainty means when you face the end of the world.
Where sin abounds, grace does more abound. St. Paul said that, and Gertrude Lefort illustrates it. When illumined by faith, fortified by grace, and inhabited by the Spirit of Christ, there is no evil the Christian cannot bear, no temptation he cannot resist. Gertrude Lefort did not succumb to the evil which surrounded her, but she fought it, and in her own sphere of influence she beat it, she mastered it. And she clearly indicates to us the source of her strength. It was not her brilliant mind nor her determined will, but it was the indwelling presence of God, that enabled her to resist the evil spirit and conquer him. She could do all things in him who strengthened her. Some people get the idea that heroism is only for exceptional people in exceptional circumstances. Nothing could be further from the truth. All men are called to be heroes. And secretly, deep in their heart of hearts, all men want to be heroes. Heroism, after all, requires only one thing, and that's love, or the willingness to commit yourself to the service of God and of others regardless of the personal price involved. The more ordinary your surroundings and the more distasteful your associates, the greater may be your opportunity to love unselfishly, heroically.
Let me give you an example of that. Tom could only be classed as an average American boy. His parents were of moderate means. His father was strict but affectionate. In high school, Tom joined the track team and excelled in swimming. He put himself through Notre Dame University by playing jazz in South Bend nightclubs. And during the summer, he conducted Greyhound tours through New Orleans, Denver, and New York. Medical school at St. Louis University was a real challenge for Tom. He had to work hard to stay near the middle of his class and had difficulty convincing the faculty that he was sufficiently serious about a medical degree. Upon his graduation, Dr. Tom enlisted the United States Navy. When Dien Bien Phu fell in 1954, the Navy sent him to North Vietnam. There, almost single-handedly, he organized refugee camps for the victims of communist tyranny. Some 600,000 men, women, and children passed under his charge and made their way to a new life in South Vietnam. Back in America, a civilian now, he organized Medico, raised funds, and returned to Asia with a team of medical volunteers. In a field hospital just 5 miles from the Red Chinese border in Laos, Dr. Tom Dooley spent the last 2 years of his life. His secret ambitions included a cliff house in Santa Barbara overlooking the ocean, horse in the pasture, hi-fi, convertible, and bourbon on the rocks. Yet he traded these dreams for a hut in an unknown village in Asia, 2 miles from a polluted river, a bicycle, powdered coffee, and a water buffalo in the front yard. Why did he do it?
Now, please, don't make me out to be a zealot. I'm just an American who saw a dirty, stinking job that had to be done, and I did it. Don't believe that trash about me being noble because I'm going into Indochina with a medical mission team. We're going to Laos because people there need medical help. There are close to 2 million people in Laos and only 1 registered doctor in the entire country. You're not noble to help people like that. It's a real joy. Jesus Christ needs hands, healing hands in the jungle. He chose my hands. Alone they can do nothing. It is his strength in my hands that comforts pain. If you don't have plenty of confidence based on the belief that God is going to help you through, you just can't function, that's all. There is nothing more monotonous than the sick call in the jungle. There's nothing particularly interesting about misery. But if there is to be success in anything, there must be constancy in your spirit, the willingness to go on and on and on, doing these things again and again, better each time. We've come late to Vietnam, but we have come. We brought not bombs and guns, but help and love. My personal desire is to help people who ain't got it so good. I want to help them simply because we're all one family under God. Now, don't let anyone tell you that I'm an extraordinary person. I'm not. But the American way of life is such that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The power of prayer explains how I can utilize 2,500 calories a day and put out for 8,000 calories a day. There is no physical explanation in the world. We Americans have got to take communism down from the clouds and rub our noses in it. It's alive. It's devouring mankind in big gulps. We don't have time left for talk. Our only answer is God. We saw the majestic power of hope in God in that dirty refugee camp. Well, it's this hope in God that men live on. Lacking it, they die. There can be no compromise, no concessions, no coexistence with godlessness. Practically every case of atrocity I saw had some religious significance attached to it. I definitely believe that there was diabolical influence present. There's no other explanation for some of the things the communists did, like the priest who had 8 nails driven into his skull to simulate the crown of thorns of our Lord. His crime was saying Mass. And there were 7 little boys and their teacher. They were praying the Our Father when communist soldiers came upon them. One soldier whipped out his bayonet and sliced off the teacher's tongue. The others took chopsticks and drove them into the ears of the 7 little boys. How do you treat cases like that? I thank God when my hands can be used to comfort the pain of these new saints.
The 20th has been called the century of Satan. It has been so. No other force can explain Dachau, Buchenwald, and the pronouncements of the men in the Kremlin. The devil's disciples are well trained. They are completely schooled in their atheistic ideology, and they are fully dedicated to their cause. They do not rest. They press forward toward their goal of world domination. Their advance can be checked only by hundreds and thousands and millions of individual human beings, like you and me. Individuals who love freedom more than life itself. Individuals who will suffer anything rather than compromise with evil. This is not a time for complacency. We are at war with the evil one. Full mobilization is necessary. Each individual must shoulder his share of the battle and make his own private personal war on evil where he is, as he is. How long has it been since you made an unsolicited donation to a worthy charity? When did you last volunteer to work on a community project? How do your business practices square with the justice and charity you owe your neighbor? Have you tolerated discrimination? Do you act as your brother's keeper? Do you go beyond that? I mean, are you your brother's brother? This century may well be called the century of Satan, for he has had his day. But generations from now, let us hope it will be remembered as the century of the saint, as that period in man's history when the forces of evil rose to their greatest heights of power and prestige, only to be smashed by the courage and faith of the human spirit. The century of Satan, or the century of the saint, only you can decide. It can be the century of the saint if you do your part now.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their nation as witnesses to the religious truth which underlies American freedom.